All right, in this conversation, I want to talk to you about the position property and how it works. So it's just an introduction of the concepts, and later we'll do a demonstration, but right now let's just have a conversation about how positioning works in general. All right, so first of all, before we get into different types of position values and properties, we need to talk about the document flow. So the first thing is, let's think about what the document flow is. It's just a simple, natural linear progression of how the elements appear in the code. Basically, from top to bottom, the browser will want to show items in a page as it encounters each item in that page, like in a 1, 2, 3 fashion, right? Okay, so now that we have an understanding of the document, you can imagine that in this document, this would be one of the first things that it would actually encounter up here, the CSS box model tutorial heading, and then it would encounter the navigation secondly, and then next it would probably be encountering the position property title, and then this paragraph, and so on, right? So it just sort of goes down the page in a natural order. Now, some of the things whenever we talk about positioning that you need to realize is that the document flow by nature is going to be a value that is referred to as static. If we were to set the property of position to something, we could set it to one of 4 different basic options: static, relative, absolute, or fixed, right? Well, static is the default, and it doesn't actually need to be specifically set in order for it to work. It just assumes, the browser is going to assume that the positioning is static unless you tell it to be something different. So this is the thing that I was just explaining to you, that it reads elements in a 1, 2, 3 fashion, and it displays them on the screen accordingly. So 1, 2, 3, ABC kind of thing, right? If you want to display things in a different way, though, you've got some other choices, right? So if you want to move stuff around on the screen visually, even though they maybe don't line up in that way, then you can use some of these other options. So let's look at relative for a moment. Now, relative will behave like static, but it kind of has these special superhero powers, right? It's something that you can use that will allow you to use what's referred to as a z-index or stacking later. And we'll get to what that actually is in a little bit. You don't necessarily know what that is just yet, but it allows you to use these special offset properties of left, right, top, and bottom. In addition to that, like I said, it allows you to use the stacking order. Something else that's really special about the relative positioning is that it will allow you to use absolute, and we're going to get to that next, but absolute children in a way that it keeps them from basically straying from outside of the relative container. So if you have a relative parent, for instance, if you tell a parent to be relative, but then you tell one of the nested children inside, or the nested descendants inside of that relative container, to be absolute, then those absolute descendants will then be absolute, but they'll be absolute relative to the relative container. And what does that even mean? So let's look at absolute. Absolute will simply pull an element out of the normal document flow when it's invoked. So far, these things, static and relative, they work within the normal document flow, okay? Whereas absolute does not. Absolute will literally just grab something and yank it out of the document flow. And because of this, it does not heed margins and spacing of other document items whenever it sees it. So if there's something else in the document flow, the natural document flow, an absolute element will not pay any attention to that other element's margins, okay? It'll basically just go wherever you tell it to go. And it behaves like it has construction adhesive. And wherever you put it, you grab it, yank it out of the document flow, and you basically stick it in a specific pixel coordinate, it'll stay there unyieldingly. It won't move. Now, one thing though, I should say to kind of clarify that whenever I say that absolute elements don't move, is that absolute elements will stay in their fixed position, but they will scroll along with the page. So they might start in some weird place on the page, but when you scroll, it will scroll off the page as you scroll. That's special because fixed is different, and we're going to get that in just a minute, but absolute will scroll. All right, and its placement is determined by those offset coordinates, so left, right, top, bottom, right? And it also allows a z-index as well, which is that stacking order. So that means you can visually layer the depth of your elements on the page with the z-index. It will accept a z-index. The only thing that does not accept a z-index is this static, okay? Relative can accept z-index, absolute can, and so can the next one, which is referred to fixed, all right? We should also pay attention to this last part, whether or not it is contained anywhere inside of a relative parent, all right? So if you put an absolute item inside of a relative parent, then it will be absolute according to where the relative parent is. We'll get to that in examples in just a minute. All right, so let's look at fixed. What is fixed? It's very much like absolute positioning in that it will pull an element out of the normal document flow when it's invoked, but unlike absolute, it does not scroll with the rest of the page. It literally stays fixed in that spot. It sort of floats above the other elements or below, if that's how you assign it, sort of like a hovercraft. A lot of the menus that you see that are like at the top nowadays, that are like at the top of the web browser page where you scroll and the menu stays there and everything goes underneath it, those are going to be fixed positions. So, and the other thing is also its placement is determined by the offsets left, right, top, bottom, and also z-index for its z-depth, all right, for that third dimension depth. But it does not take orders from the relative parents the way that the obedient absolute positioning does, okay? So let's take a minute to kind of go over all those principles that we just discussed. And what we're going to do is we're going to open this practice page, and I'm going to start a new video tutorial. So you can go ahead and do this, and then we'll get started.